if you said something bad, how would you fix it? Mm-hmm. And if you can't say how you would fix it, then maybe it wasn't bad. Mm-hmm. Because if it can't be fixed, then maybe it's just an unintended consequences that we couldn't control. Welcome to the Todd Barham Leadership Podcast. Like and subscribe wherever you listen to this content and share it with a friend.
Okay, Pastor Todd, we are back this week and we are going to talk about feedback.
Feedback, okay?
How do we give feedback? How do we ask for it? Why do we need it?
I think asking for it is the hardest.
Yeah.
I think by nature as humans we give feedback fairly easily, but sometimes as leaders we tend to put ourselves in a bubble and don't accept feedback. So, but feedback is what keeps us from saying the dumb thing. Mm-hmm. So a practice of feedback that we do here at Hope Church is every I try to have it there by Thursday morning. Today is Wednesday and I'm ahead of the game. I already have my sermon in. So what I do is I give the sermon to my staff and I ask them to answer 3 questions. So I stole this from Craig Rochelle. So if you want to accuse me for plagiarizing, you can. So he says, tell me, number 1, percentage of completion. Why is that important? Because they're your staff. They're not going to tell you if they think the sermon is bad. Mm-hmm. But if they don't say it's 100% complete, that's their way of saying they don't think it's a complete thought. And then number 2, what stuck out to you the most? And number 3, what is one thing that you would change? So I don't always get a ton of always get a ton of negative feedback. Usually it's always positive feedback, but the feedback I take is what stuck out to you the most. If it tends to be the same thing, everybody's saying the same thing, mm-hmm. then I know when I preach, that's the moment that I need to hammer down on, because this is the
speaking to everybody.
Yeah, this is the thought that's speaking to everybody. Okay. And so, but if I don't have that feedback, there's been times, especially in a marriage series, when I'm talking about husband and wife roles, I have a predominantly female staff. So I want to know how I would rather them tell me that it did not land well with them, who love me and will protect me, than to say it on the stage and offend everybody and then have to backtrack publicly. And so feedback helps you to not say the dumb thing from the stage.
So it sounds like it's crucial for self-management.
Oh, sure. I mean, especially if you want to get any better. So I hate listening to myself. But if you go back when I was a young preacher, I don't do it as much anymore. I'll do it occasionally. If you'll go back and listen to yourself, you learn your gait. Like I used to say, a lot. And so now instead of saying, I just pause. You don't have to say anything while you're collecting your thoughts. And in a lot of ways, if you say something good, you need to pause mm-hmm. and let them think about it, because they're still thinking about the thing that you just said. But feedback helps you, and going back and listening to yourself helps you understand, well, I need to slow down here. I don't need to speak as fast here. I made a good point here and now I'm talking over myself. And that's one thing that a lot of young pastors do. They say something really good and then they don't shut up. They'll say something really, really good and then they'll just talk over it. Well, they're still trying to think through the great thing that you just said and you've already moved on. Let it marinate. Let mm-hmm. it sit there. But you don't know that without either 1, listening to feedback, or 2, what's it called? And every staff that preaches, I will come to your office, and the first question I ask you, do you remember?
How do you think you did?
How do you think you did? Because
Mm-hmm.
how you think you did will tell me where I can. Because if you think that you did bad in this, then instantly I can speak into what you think you did bad. But then I don't know.
Instead of just walking in and telling me.
Yeah, instead of just walking in and saying, well, that sucked, right? Mm-hmm. I just walk in. Now, if you feel like you didn't do a good job, then I can help your self-confidence by saying, it wasn't as bad as you thought it was, or you didn't do as bad as you did. I think everybody loved it, and try to repair that. But I always try to I used to do sermon reviews. Like I have a note, but I felt that was very informal. And I felt that was I felt it was too formal. and too direct. So I felt better every time y'all preached to just come into your office and say, or text you or talk to you and say, how do you feel like it went? How you did this? And usually most everybody's good enough and knows themselves enough that they know where they did wrong. And then you can just kind of say, I would have done this differently this time, but it wasn't bad.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Okay. So you are clearly well-versed as a leader at giving feedback.
Sure.
But you've brought all of the current staff under and taught us how to receive feedback and how to ask for it.
Yeah.
And the sermon review is a really great system because we also submit our sermons to be reviewed, and it's kind of nerve-wracking for a minute. Everyone is always so kind and honest, and and we just love each other well in that way. But what about how you tell everybody a little bit about how you prepare us to receive the feedback and some things that you do with us here in the staff to receive the feedback that maybe we don't want to hear or we're not ready to hear, the hard stuff?
So oftentimes I will ask you, hey, can we talk about this? Are you ready to hear what I have to say about it? Oftentimes I'll ask them that because they're giving me permission to speak into it. I'm going to do it anyway. If you say, no, I'm not ready to talk about it, I'm going to respond with, well, when is a good time? We need to talk about it. But I will ask for the permission to speak into, but it makes it easier because we've already set the culture of feedback. You receive feedback from me because you give me feedback every week. It's
a level playing field.
Yeah, it's a level playing field. You will get the opportunity to give me feedback. I always give you that opportunity. And then oftentimes there's many times that I have a good idea and I'll pitch it to the staff and say, hey guys, what do y'all think? And so I do that a lot. I probably do it a lot more than maybe even I should, because sometimes you guys are like, hey, that's cool. But I think it's good that you see that, hey, I'm willing to hear that this is an awful idea. I'm willing to hear that this needs to be better. I'm willing to hear that this needs to be thought through more. But I think part of it is you just got to set the culture. Because if everybody works in a bubble and nobody ever gives each other feedback, it's hard to start. But it's the easiest place to start is sermons, because we do them every week. And some people do it. I've heard some full-time staff people do it where everybody comes in the sanctuary and the pastor will just preach it. And
Please don't do that.
Yeah. and they'll give the feedback that way. We don't have a predominantly full-time staff right now. And so we just do it based upon our sermon notes. But however you decide to do it, is fine. And, it just creates a culture that we're used to. Nobody here does anything and expects to get zero feedback. And if they do, they better figure it out real quick that we're going to have an opinion, and you better be ready to hear about it.
Well, and I think you've also, with the reading and the podcasts and the leadership things that we do throughout the month, that also prepares us. We expect that feedback is coming, and I think everyone gets a little anxious waiting for feedback because you never know what people are going to say. But the culture that we do have here and the leadership focused things that we do here prepare everyone for that. And it's hard to hear, but it is necessary for our growth and to just really be our best selves, especially.
Well, in some ways, the reading check-ins, which the listeners probably don't know this, but every month, it was actually today, the first Wednesday of every month, in the morning, the staff is pinged we use Basecamp. It's a project management system, and it pings them, and however you want to do it is fine. It pings them the first Wednesday of every month at 9 a.m. What is God speaking to you about? You don't have to be super personal, but I want to know that you're doing your devotional. And I require at least one book to be read or a portion of a class. So what are you doing? And that's a built-in feedback loop. So if you aren't doing what you're supposed to do, and you don't lie,
oh my gosh,
then I have the opportunity to say, hey, you need to make sure you finish a book or this. But what's great.
And that was hard when we started because we were all starting at the same time with you.
Yeah. And I would give some feedback, and I was kind. I was always saying, hey, remember the expectation is this. And, and when it would give me an opportunity when the staff was struggling, hey, what are you interested in? I can suggest some books for you to read. And I also encourage them, go look at what I'm reading and read my synopsis and goes, ooh, that sounds like something I want to read. And it helps each other too, because now we look at each other, what each other's reading, and it's kind of a built-in feedback loop.
Now it's a normal conversation of what we're reading and what we're going to read next month and the month after that.
Well, yeah. And now it's just like feedback. It started out hard. But once you build it into the culture, you get used to it, it becomes easier. But when you bring new people on, which we've done recently, when you bring new people on, they have to get used to the everyday. They have to get used to what you do. But it's easier when the collective already does it. It's easier to assimilate new people.
They just walk into the culture. They know that this is how we do things.
Yeah, they get along to get along. So
it sounds like from a leader standpoint, it ties into what we talked about last week, that your communication is key. Asking questions is very, very powerful to get someone to see where you're coming from, but also to see where they are to receive the feedback, because I feel like it's really important that we know our audience when we're asking for feedback, more so than when we're giving feedback.
Well,
I said that backwards. I think that we need to know who we're speaking to. We need to know the person we're giving feedback to versus when we ask an audience. We don't really have to prepare ourselves because it's more of a wide range of feedback. So what are some ways that leaders can help cultivate that within their staff or within their organization, that feedback is expected?
Well, you just have to keep asking the questions. So, I try to leave our staff meetings. I try not to just make our staff meetings very formulaic. Do this, do this, do this, do this. Every staff meeting, I try to build in some brainstorming time. And the reason I'm building in the brainstorming time is because you're brainstorming for me, but you're also giving me feedback. And then your feedback is bouncing off each other, because you may not like so-and-so's idea and so-and-so may not like your idea. So you're giving each other active feedback as we go. And so it makes it more comfortable. Ultimately, your feedback is directed at me, but you're already giving each other feedback actively as we're feeding back from me. And so I found that when you work those into the staff meetings, it becomes a little easier. Now, when you first do it, if you're not used to it, you'll say, hey guys, what do y'all think? And it used to, they just sit quietly and look at me. Now I say, we got to move on. We've given enough ideas. We need to move on. Let's look at this next aspect of this conversation. And so, once you build it into your culture, once people feel comfortable and that they're not going to get murdered for giving feedback, they will give it to you freely. But you as a leader have to be ready. Because sometimes we as leaders are a little sensitive. When we put out our sermon, it's our baby. We think it's the best thing since sliced bread. And sometimes we have to be prepared that when the feedback is negative, well, they're just trying to help us be better. They don't hate us. We asked them for this. We're asking them to give us feedback. They did what we asked for. So now we can't have our feelings hurt because they gave us what we asked for.
So that tracks right along with what I'm thinking. Is you brought up our staff meetings, and something that we do for feedback that I think is so crucial until it's my turn is after an event when we debrief. And not just our big stuff, because as someone like our outreach director puts on all of our big events. And so that is a lot of weight. She is a perfectionist. She loves to do a great job, and she puts everything into it. There is nothing she hasn't thought out. And so to hear afterwards us say all of the things, it's really hard. And so because the culture is set, she may walk in anxious, but we all can already read her. And because we know her, we can give that to her slowly. And I think we've all learned that the feedback is just input. It's information from someone else completely different from our thought process, and that it can be necessary, because there have been plenty of times Amanda and I share an office, so I can say that she might get some feedback that she doesn't love, but then she will ask she continues. She tracks the feedback all the way to the end and does not leave the back door open. She makes sure that she understands, where was the person coming from? I still don't see it that way. And then sometimes she'll have a couple of conversations and say, I just still don't see it that way.
Yeah.
But it's acceptable.
But
We just say,
that's
okay.
okay.
And then
Yeah.
if she doesn't do it, she doesn't do it. And I know I get feedback all the time with the things I do in my ministries. And there's a lot of times where I'm like, it's just a no, because maybe I don't have the resources to do it right then. Or a lot of times I will say no. They will ask why, because they want me to say, I can't take that on right now. And they're willing to help.
Yeah.
So the feedback becomes very powerful within a team setting.
Yeah.
Of how we can work together and not be personally offended by opinions all the time.
But the recap or the debrief afterwards are key. I mean, I would say to any leader, if you're planning an event, plan your debrief.
And if you're not teaching your staff that
Yeah.
a debrief is expected, you're really holding them back.
Yeah, and you're never going to get better. But if you'll notice, I start with two key things with the debrief. One is,
What are
the
right?
facts? What are the facts? What are the facts that are unchangeable? How many people came? Maybe how many people got saved? How many?
Ground us in the data. Yeah.
This is what is not changed, and this is not an opinion. This is facts. But the first thing we do is what?
What went right?
What went right? Because you don't want to start with what went bad, because whoever has run that event, if you start with what went bad, they're already on the defensive.
Yeah.
And so it's what went bad, or what went good, what went bad, and then what would you change? So when we say something went bad, I don't just let them say something bad. Now, how do we change this?
Yeah.
You don't just get to say something bad. You said something bad, but how do you fix it? Because if you're not constructive, then it's criticism,
Yes.
not feedback.
Yes,
And that's the key. We got to remember that. We can't give feedback that's negative unless we have a fix.
It's
Otherwise,
just
we're
as
criticizing.
damaging as the
Yeah.
feedback that is being weaponized.
Yeah.
I want you to know, I want you to change this. And
Right. Well, and then we end by dreaming, hey, if money were no object, what would you do in this event? But I mean, that's the key. In order for feedback to be productive, you have to say, if you said something bad, how would you fix it? And if you can't say how you would fix it, then maybe it wasn't bad. Because if it can't be fixed, then maybe it's just an unintended consequences that we couldn't control.
I
And
feel
those
like
happen.
it also helps us work together better, that we are completely okay in the space of nobody is agreeing. When we're sitting at the table or even in a group chat or nobody is agreeing, but it doesn't change the person that is receiving the feedback. They can still press forward. They're not obligated to do any of it.
Yeah.
And then we just give more feedback if it falls short, and it's a growth opportunity. We don't use it. We don't think it's our mission to just make them personally better by giving our 2 cents.
Well, I mean, and just think through, one of our events that always has a lot of opinions and feedback is Trunk or Treat. But the event has gotten better every year because we said, let's try this. Oh, that didn't work. Let's try this. Oh, that didn't work. And every year we have a discussion about it, and this year the big discussion was, well, Halloween falls on a Friday. How's that going to work? And everybody really had different opinions on it. And ultimately it boiled down to, when we started talking about the opinions, that nobody thought that we could get enough volunteers to run the event on a Friday, which is completely understandable. So we can't run an event if we don't have volunteers. And so, but that came through the feedback loop. It came through, well, I don't think we're going to have volunteers, because that makes us all go, when somebody, I don't remember who said it, and it doesn't matter, but somebody said, I didn't think we'd have enough volunteers. I hadn't thought about that. I'm like, everybody's going to come.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to come because it's Halloween on a Friday. But they said,
And our church, we all love each other.
yeah,
We're
we all
just
love each other.
Doing all the things together.
But somebody said, well, since it's Friday, you're going to have less volunteers.
And then
I'm
there
like,
was times of year, and the conversation grew to where the table did get quiet. We were like, wow, that is a lot to consider.
Well, and we remembered from our feedback, we had a little less volunteers. Remember from the facts, we had less volunteers this year than we did the year before. And so, but if we're worried about volunteer flow on a Friday, and the concern was already volunteers, then we have to make the decision based upon volunteers, not based upon what day we think is best for the event. But that all comes from feedback. It doesn't come from, it makes the decision easy when with feedback, the decision makes itself. You don't have to make a decision because it just makes sense.
Yeah.
the
Well,
right.
and then if you don't take the feedback, that's your growing opportunity that might be a little bit
Well, then you're just going to have a
uncomfortable.
Yeah, well, then
but
you're
it's
just going to
learning.
have a mediocre event. But if you want to have a mediocre event, then you'll have a mediocre event, and everybody will be mediocre, and you'll live your mediocre life. So
Well, and I mean, we've seen growth in ministries by opening the door that way. Myself and the men's director, like
Yeah.
we have seen just him being able, it sounds silly to anybody in ministry listening, but when our men's director came on, I had to sit on my hands going, I have all these great ideas, but it's women's ministry.
Right.
And he was really open to it. And there were a lot of things that were successful that you would not think you could carry from women's ministry into men's ministry. But because that was just acceptable, that's just how we do things.
Yeah.
The door was open for me to say, hey, can we have a conversation? I really want to share some things with you.
Yeah.
And he took some of it and didn't take any of it. We laughed about some things, across the board. But then afterwards, I would ask him, how did it go? To get that opportunity to say, well, I did see this. Or for him to, because I was able to carry things into my ministry, all because we were able to have a conversation. And it did not matter what he said. My feelings weren't going to be hurt.
Sure.
My goal was, how do we grow in ministry and how do we reach the people in the church?
Well, it also bolsters the team dynamic, because once you do it right, when someone gives feedback into an event, then all of a sudden they're invested in the event because they've worked on the event. I may give feedback to the women's conference. I'm not a woman, but then I'm invested in the conference because I've given the feedback to the women's conference. And, then now, even though I'm not a woman, I'm invested in the outcome of the women's conference.
Well, we need you. So we're going to let you give all the feedback. We need you.
Yeah, you just need.
You're our media team.
You just need me to run sound.
Everybody else is participating. Yeah, you're the media guy.
We have a heavy female media team, but
Can't find volunteers for your women's conference, ladies. You hit your pastor up and show him this podcast.
yeah.
But you said something really. So how are we going to prepare to receive it? How do we prepare ourselves to receive it? Is it the leader that teaches the team to receive the feedback?
Yeah. Well, you as the leader have to lead the way.
What does that mean? Like, for those that are listening that may go, wow, that was a really leadership jargon phrase. Receive what, April? Well, receive the feedback.
Well, you have to start.
What does that mean?
You have to start by allowing your team to give feedback into what you do. You can't only give feedback into their stuff. You've got to allow, in order to create the culture, in order to make them feel like it's a feedback driven culture, you have to let them give feedback into what you do. For instance, I talked about the sermons, but also, big all church events. I mean, really, my neck's on the line on all church events. And so, we talk about that, and we all get in there, but really, I mean, you're comfortable because every week you critique me. Essentially, you critique my
So
sermon
teach
every
them
week.
that it is just an everyday part of their job. How do you navigate? What are you doing to navigate the different genders within your staff to give feedback? Because to me, I could easily give feedback to a male staff member all day long, but there seems to be a lot involved with women. But would you say that it's the opposite or the same across the board?
I think both men and women both receive feedback about the same.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have to be just as sensitive with the lady as you do. I've met some really sensitive dudes.
Yeah.
So, and we've had some really sensitive dudes in the past on our staff. So, it's based upon the person. It's based upon their personality, their skill set, their type. It's based upon all of those things, and you just have to work with them and relate to them, and just understand that sometimes maybe you need to give the feedback, and sometimes you maybe not need to give the feedback.
So it sounds like you've had enough experience that your feedback and how you do it and your approach is the same regardless. You're looking at the person as a whole, making sure that they're able to receive it, kind of reading the room, just like we talked last week. It seems to be very tied into communication.
Well, yeah, and it's all, really, when you develop the culture of feedback, it doesn't necessarily matter to the person to person, because everybody's getting it. Everybody's getting the same. No one's being singled out as someone that's different than somebody else, because everybody gets feedback. You don't get to do an event without getting some feedback. You don't get to give a sermon without getting feedback. I mean, I expect everyone to give me feedback, and when everybody preaches, they're expected to receive feedback before they get on the stage. So that when you're asked to preach, that you're going to have to turn in your sermon and receive feedback. And if you're not ready for that, then I don't know what to tell you. You're not going to preach. That's just the culture we've adopted.
But also it's a guardrail as a leader. It sounds like for you, it's a guardrail, whereas for the person receiving it, a staff member, it's a growth opportunity. And you can take it or leave it, and you can filter through it. But there is always, I feel like there's always something there.
Sure.
Whether you're learning something about yourself, you see an area you need to manage better, or you see an area and you take it to the Lord and go, I really didn't like that. And he says, hey, you have a huge growth opportunity here, and it is necessary, and be prepared for it. So
well, and most of our staff, I mean, I've never had anybody get on stage and they were about to say something just so off the wall that was so bad that I had to talk to them about it. But there's been a time or two I'm like, hey, this is a theological hot button. This is what we believe. Just be careful around this, or dig in here. This is really good. I would also say this: 9 times out of 10, I'll give the staff member that's preaching, I'll give them one more point or one more thing that they say. I'm like, hey, I'd also say this, or dig in here. And it's just making, you take your message or you take your event, and with the feedback, you take it from good to great, because we don't want to just do something that's good. The feedback is what sharpens it and makes it better. And you cut out the fluff. Because I got some feedback in my preaching from a church member a while back, that they felt that I cut up and talked to people in the crowd too much, and that I wasn't focused enough. Now, I could take that as, they hate me, why do they hate my preaching? But I took it as, okay, I need to be more focused, and I adjusted how I did my notes so that I could be more focused. Now they put my notes on the back screen, so I'm not so tied to looking down, and I can more naturally look at our back screen and read my notes off of our back screen like they do with the worship lyrics, and that has helped me stay more focused, and that has helped me stay on track more. Now April can tell you, I still cut up with people in the audience, but I don't spend the whole sermon doing it now, to where I would be tempted to do it a little too much in the past, but I took the feedback. It was said with it was said with a good heart. I knew this person was for my best, and they wouldn't have said it to hurt me. So I have the opportunity to grow, or I have the opportunity to get bitter. And so
the opportunity to grow or the opportunity to get bitter, that is really good.
Yeah.
And it's a hard place to be. Because I can certainly resonate with that. You talk about your notes being on the back screen to help you focus, because it is really easy to get off on a tangent. And so the feedback is important for the staff. And you've allowed us, I'll take this a bit further. We talk so much about the sermons, but it is such a good illustration, because I feel like you could take that system and implement it in anything that you do. You could implement it with your kids when you're, especially your teenagers, because they're not listening to anything, but they're probably going to listen to a question or two.
Yeah.
But even the personal stories, it's not just our biblical references and topics, and it's not just the theology of our sermons. And I know that you allow us, when we don't list the personal story, people we can ask about it, because also it comes front is, are you sure you want to say that?
Yeah.
And how is that kingdom minded, or how is that furthering the kingdom of God? Because you're protecting us, and we might be protecting you. Like, hey, we know you, and I understand that story, and I've personally asked you, tell me the whole story. Don't write it out. I've called, I've asked, because I thought you were tracking one way, and I was worried that it would not land where it needed to.
Yeah.
And you were very welcoming and accepting of that. Ran it by other staff members, like, I didn't think of that.
Yeah.
But I hate to say the word saved you, but it was necessary even for the church. Like, that could have just, somebody could have heard that and just misread the message, but where you were trying to go with it wasn't landing where you needed it to. And so we needed to adjust. And that goes along with the feedback of the church member that you got, because that can really mislead people.
Yeah. Well, like a few months back, we did a marriage series, and I was preaching through the, wives submit to your husbands, husbands submit to your wives, or husbands love your wives. And, I was preaching on wives submit to your husbands. And so what I did is I walked in to the ladies that were in the room.
Yes.
And
Okay.
said,
Yes.
you remember this? Mm-hmm. And I said, here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to say this. 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 And I'm going to say this. Was any of that offensive to you?
That was quite the tabled conversation that day.
Yeah. And what I did is I saw how it landed with them. I got their feedback on how they landed and what stuck out to them, what they didn't like. And in real time, I could talk through it with them. And now when I got on the stage, I didn't offend anybody. Why? Because I had the opportunity to offend the ones that, aren't going to be offended, because I said, hey, I want to try this out on you. And then I got to get on stage and not be offendable or offend other people. And I got to talk through it. And there's some times that I talk about some hot button issues. Mm-hmm. And I'll talk them out loud to whoever is here in the office and say, hey, I'm going to say this. I'm going to say this. Is this? And I'll say, is this too far? Mm-hmm. I'll ask them, is this too far? Because then they can tell me I've opened it up to say, Pastor, I think you went too far there. If I did, then I'll track it back. And then if they say yes, I said, okay, where is the bridge too far? Where did I go too far? Where can I go right up to without going over the line? Because that's essentially, as pastors, we have to, when we're preaching, we have to go right up to the line, but we can't go over the line. Mm-hmm. But sometimes as pastors, we can straddle the line, and especially on the hot button issues of today.
Oh yeah.
We have to get right up to the line, but we can't straddle the line. We still have to stay on the pastoral side.
I feel like our younger ministry folks listening in will understand this, whereas it might be maybe our over 40 crowd might not think about it at the front of their mind. And something that comes to mind for me about feedback in general from your staff within ministry as a pastor is we're all online. We are all preaching from not just the pulpit, not just in the sanctuary. Yep. We're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, it's TikTok, the Reels. Our content is being shared. And if we are not careful what we put out, it will be misused. And that creates a whole nother issue.
Yeah.
And so we need the feedback before we put things out, especially on our socials.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so recently I had a pretty hot button TikTok. I was talking about homosexuality. And what I said in the room was very well received. But when it was taken onto the online context, I was getting roasted. Like I even had a guy who took one of my gestures and said, "This guy's Hitler," because I talk with my hands. So he screenshotted what it looked like I was doing.
At the exact moment,
yeah.
Quite the talent.
Yeah.
I'll give him
yeah.
that.
So now I'm very. That gave me feedback of I got to be careful.
Oh yeah, that's good.
I got to be careful of the placement of my hands because these people out here are looking for that crap.
Yeah,
and I've
got
to
discredit the name of God.
Right,
the word
and
of
I've
God.
got to. I've just got to be careful. And so now, if you watch, if I raise an arm, I raise both arms. I don't just raise one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wasn't even thinking of that, but that
and
was
so
a good example.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, it's not what I was doing. He was looking for it. He screen grabbed it at just the right moment, but
it was just enough misinformation that no one questioned it.
Right.
Everyone jumped on the bandwagon.
Yeah.
Probably didn't even Google your name or the church or the sermon or the scripture.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, now you have this floating. And once it's out there, it's out there. There's nothing we can do about that.
Again, that was negative feedback, but I can use it as a positive and think through, okay,
now we're mindful of those things.
Now they're going to do this, so I need to be aware of how I do this, how I say this. But I mean, with my homosexuality comment, I got roasted on both sides. I don't know that I could have said that any different. But it's just you get feedback from everywhere, and you can use your negative feedback to make yourself better too. You just have to get over it in your emotions because emotions are hard. I am a sensitive guy. A lot of people probably don't know that about me, but I am pretty sensitive. So there's times when I do the sermon feedback that I can get my feelings hurt, but then I have to remind myself they're just trying to give me feedback. I asked them for this. They're doing what I asked them for. So we'll be driving in the car and I'll say, well, so-and-so said this about my sermon. And Crystal will go, well, you asked them for feedback. I'm like, that's true.
It is hard. It's hard, but also I would also push anyone listening that if you find yourself always dispelling the feedback and being critical of it and not receiving it, you have more growth to do, and it is holding you back. I don't care. You don't have to be a pastor. Even your feedback from your spouse, you need feedback to be the best version of you. You need feedback for self-management. But all of the things, you're a leader everywhere you go, and all the things that we've talked about so far, they really do work congruently.
Sure. Well, I mean, whether you like it or not, every avenue in your life is giving you some sort of feedback. The question is, are you willing to receive it? And honestly, most of us are just not willing to receive feedback. We think and honestly, we don't want to say this to ourselves, but if we're unwilling to take feedback, then we think we are perfect and we have nothing to change.
And you're not Jesus.
And you're not Jesus. So so it's not a,
we all have growing.
We all need to grow. We all need to receive feedback. We all can get better. And that's just it. I mean, every week, I don't think I've preached my best sermon, but I want to try to do my best sermon I've ever preached the next week. And the only way I do it is working and receive feedback. And that's what you have to do.
Yeah. So end us with this.
Okay.
What is a really good starting place for anyone, regardless if you are going, you know what, I don't even know what feedback is or how to ask for it, or I feel like I'm doing a great job in my organization with feedback and I'm getting nothing.
Yeah.
Where's a soft place for us to start?
Easy place to start is brainstorming ideas. Now, I wouldn't do hot button ideas. I would do, hey, we're doing this at the church. What do you guys think? For us, our 15-year anniversary is coming up. An easy place to start for us would have been, hey, we're having the 15-year anniversary. What do you think matters at a church 15-year anniversary?
That conversation didn't go the way you thought it was going to go.
It didn't at all. No, actually. But
we were more on board than you thought.
Yeah, I thought y'all would think it was dumb, but you all loved it. But that's where you start. And I would start. You can start just in group texts. Group texts are fun to have. Group texts can get crazy sometimes with feedback.
Poor Skylar.
And then you have staff meetings are great. It's a great place to start. Like I said, I always try to rope in some brainstorming. We can't avoid it. There's business to take care of in every staff meeting, but I always try to rope in some brainstorming time because we're giving each other feedback, whether we like it or not. That's a good place to start, and you just got to keep pushing and push through the discomfort.
So just start doing it. Just
start doing it and push through the discomfort. The problem is we've been taught not to receive feedback, and we've been taught to be polite. And so,
there it is.
Yeah, we've been taught to be polite, and so we feel like we're being rude by telling somebody,
or it's not our place.
Yeah, or it's not our place. But if you open it up, then you have to do it, and the more you do it, the more you feel comfortable. But you, as a leader, you can't backbite them when they give you feedback, or they're not going to give it. That's a note I've had to receive over time. I've had a few of the staff come to me and say, "Hey, I feel like when I give my feedback, you're biting me, and I'm scared to give feedback." And I said, "I'm sorry, I didn't." And so,
I can help them.
Yeah, I said, "You just learn, you just listen," and that then there is feedback as well, and you've got to receive it. Now, there is a point where feedback goes too far, where you don't have to be personal. You don't have to personally.
And you can cut it off too when you recognize. Just say thanks for the information.
Yeah, you don't have to receive personal attacks, and sometimes in an unhealthy staff culture, it can go to personal attacks, and we've had that happen before when we've had some unhealthy culture that we had to work through, and you take care of it. And what you do as a leader is always model the right way to give feedback, and never backbite, never show to the public you're backbiting any of the staff. I always try to show, to all the staff, I always try to leave my harshest feedback for one-on-one. I try not to do it in front of everybody else. I will give feedback, but if I have something like, say, April's preaching a sermon, if I have feedback that's on the harsher side, I won't give that in public. I'll give the nice feedback in public.
I wouldn't hear anything you said.
Yeah. And so I'll come to the office and say, hey, I have some things that I didn't put in there that I wanted to talk to you personally because I wanted to make sure you heard my heart on it. And that's just better. And don't text that to April because she takes that harshly. I was in California and I reviewed her sermon, sent her a long list, and she never responded.
You did ask me, and I said, no, if you're texting me, if I want it in text or on the phone, I don't want it at all. I did say that. I did. I was half joking, but I needed a moment to process because
Yeah.
I knew what was coming, and all joking aside,
Yeah.
I knew what was coming was going to be hard.
Yeah.
And I'll say it 100 times where I am in life right now, and as a mom of 4 in 2 completely different life stages, working full time, and my husband works full time. I knew that I needed a minute because I could have just said, okay, he wants to talk to me right now. And I knew what you were doing at that particular time. So I knew you had time, and I had to sit there and consider, do I just push through? And I said, nope, I won't hear anything that he says because instantly when you said that, even though I know you, and hear me for those of you listening, even though I knew in my heart how it was coming, my physical body, my worldly self just got all jumbled up, and the enemy kind of kept me. I needed to pray and I needed to get myself ready. But because I did that this time, I heard it. Now I wasn't able to process all of it because I was very nervous and very overwhelmed because I got blindsided to preach on a Sunday when it was going to be very busy, and I was very scared. And so
Blame Maddie. I had to
Yeah.
go to California.
Yeah.
So, but you took
but
the
I had to
feedback.
position myself,
and
and
you
I was
learned.
able to step back and stop and do that.
And you learn for next time. And you know, there, and over your ministry, there's not many times that I've had to give you really
You don't give enough feedback.
deep, hard feedback.
Yeah.
And this was one of the times that I was like, hey, I just don't feel like this landed. This needed a few more things. And none of it was really earth shattering. But I mean, it was harsher than what you were used to.
Well, and I was already struggling because you did give me some good points, and I said, no, I'm going to show him I can do it.
Yeah.
And tried to do it on my own. And by the end of it, I was comparing Moses and Jesus and the prophecy spoken over them. And that was exactly not what we were preaching about that week. And so, but I needed that. I needed to ground myself, but I also had to open myself at that time to Justin. So us sharing that story sort of brings us into what we're going to talk about next week, which is being reactionary.
Okay.
And being reactionary to your feedback is absolutely counterproductive. So I think we're on the right track
Well,
here.
I mean, reactionary, you just have to, you have to learn to deal with your emotions, and oftentimes
And know your emotions.
know your emotions, and oftentimes we just have to take a breath, and then realize where it's coming from. But we'll talk about more of
So
that.
join us next week as Pastor Todd tells me I need to learn to take a breath before I speak.
We'll see you there.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to the Todd Barham Leadership Podcast. If you're watching us on YouTube, press subscribe. If you're listening to us on any podcasting platform, you could rate and review us. That would really help out the show. We'll see you next time.